Previously, a country forgot the sound of triumph and learned to live with the taste of ash. They said the first voice came when the bells of Domrémy rang across fields too thin to feed their own shadows. Noon sat on her shoulders like a weight. Jean knelt beside the sheepfold, fingers raw from rope and frost, the air smelling of hay and old rain, and the stillness pressed until it spoke. It was not thunder, it was not wind. It was a brightness folding inward and fitting behind the ribs like a key turning. Later she would name it Michael, and then Catherine, and then Margaret. But names came after obedience. First there was command, cold and exact, as simple as breath. The village embroidered what it could not leave plain. Whispers spread that the meadow flickered, that roses opened under her feet, that a sweetness like incense walked with her. Yet many believe this is a myth rather than record. What cannot be disputed is that her laughter thinned. Her eyes began to look past hedges and roofs, and her prayers burned longer than candles. The war had scattered bones into ditches and fear into wells. Paris belonged to the English. Burgundy sold loyalty by the pound, and the Dauphin moved through borrowed halls like a rumor trying to find its speaker. In that rot, a girl stood very still and began to listen. The voices returned. Go to Vaucouleurs, ask for an escort, seek the Dauphin, raise the siege of Orléans, carry him to Reims and do not stop until the oil touches his brow. At 16 she cut her hair, put on men's clothes, and left home. The church would call the clothing a sin. The road did not care. Frost cracked under hooves. Smoke from a burned farm drifted for miles and did not lift. Each night she faced the fire and watched the smoke rise like a thin column of prayer. When the flames sank low, she listened, as if the sky were a mouth that would answer if the world grew quiet enough. At Vaucouleurs she stood before Robert de Baudricourt. He had buried too many miracles to waste time on a new one. He laughed, short and tired, and told her to go home. She returned the next morning and the next, until mockery sounded like a habit his throat could not maintain. Men began to follow her with their eyes when she crossed the yard. Not desire, caution. She did not bargain. She did not flinch. She waited with the calm of a verdict that has already been signed. In the end, he gave her a letter, a horse, and men enough to make a rumor. He gave her a chance to vanish into distance. She took the road instead. The escort rode through winter hedges and rivers cold as iron. Wolves followed at the edges of torchlight. She rode at the front with her jaw set and spoke softly to the wind as if repeating instructions. They reached Chinon, a palace of wax and fatigue where candles tried and failed to make velvet look like power. The Dauphin hid among courtiers to test her. The hall was a bright maze. She walked past decoys with a face scrubbed to a pale flame and knelt before the right man. It was said that she named a private prayer. Modern scholars view this as rumor, not evidence. The true record shows that when she rose, the prince straightened, and Hope, thin and suspicious, looked in through the window and did not leave. The questioning continued in a side chamber where the air smelled of damp stone and old coins. Churchmen examined her for falsehood in shape and in story. She answered with the steadiness of a worker explaining a craft learned by doing it. She spoke of voices, of saints, of Orléans, and of Reims. They debated sin and obedience. She spoke again and did not raise her voice. In the end, they did not know what she was. They knew what she could be used for. Armor was forged for her, bright and practical, straps new enough to creak, edges sharpened clean. A white banner was given, lilies bright, the names of Jesus and Mary stitched in gold. She refused a sword from the armory and told men to dig behind the altar at Sainte Catherine de Fierbois. There they found a blade crusted with time and marked with 5 small crosses near the hilt. Whispers spread that the sword was a sign from heaven. Yet many believe such stories are conveniences after the fact. What cannot be disputed is that the steel woke under oil and sand, and her hand learned its weight. Orléans waited with its throat beneath a boot. English bastides ringed the city with earth and timber, patient and methodical. Inside the walls, bread turned to ash in the mouth. Jean entered by night with a convoy of grain and a river smell clinging to wagons and men. Bells answered her arrival. She ordered soldiers to confession, She forbade swearing and drunkenness. She had women and children moved from streets that would soon turn into corridors for death. Faith, in her hands, looked like discipline. The assaults opened under a sky hard as iron. Arrows hissed like insects. Smoke crawled along the ground and turned lungs into small furnaces. Ladders slapped stone. She climbed with the banner where fear gathers, near the lip of the wall where breath turns thin and men step back. An English shaft punched through her shoulder and came out the other side. She went down on her knees, linen dark with blood, and asked for a cross. Someone bound 2 sticks with cord and put it in her hand. She pressed the wood to her lips, stood, and walked back into smoke. The night stretched like wire. At dawn, the English line cracked. On the 8th of May, Orléans exhaled, and bells did not ring for victory so much as for the return of breath. She knelt in mud and wept. Not because triumph is sweet, but because certainty is heavy. If the voices were true, then every choice must answer them without appeal. Morning found her in the same place where she had fallen, eyes bright with fever and resolve. Letters went to the English. "Leave this land," she wrote, "and no evil will happen to you. Stay, and you will meet war from the God of the armies of France." The pen cut the page in a hand that was clumsy, the intent cut deeper than ink. After Orléans, the road north unfurled like a promise. Towns opened their gates at her name. Markets filled as if famine had been a long, bad dream. Priests blessed old gallows holes. Soldiers who had learned to live on despair began to sing work songs. When she rode through Troy, the people lined the ditches and reached for her stirrup and touched dust instead. They kept the dust like relics. Whispers spread that her armor glowed at night and that her horse never tired. Yet many believe those are comforts laid over exhaustion. The true record shows wet boots, dull bread, and a girl asleep in armor with her mouth open from sheer fatigue. Faith does not cancel the body. It teaches the body to step past its limits. John Talbot watched from a distance that he intended to close. He read the reports with a soldier's contempt and a hunter's attention. A peasant had turned the wind. The English would have to make the air heavy again. He checked the fittings on his cuirass and told his captains to keep their lines clean. He did not speak of saints. He spoke of angles and bridges and food. He understood what dread could do as well as Jeanne did. He intended to teach the lesson back. The march bent toward Reims. Vineyards lay trampled. Villages wore smoke like a memory. Reims rose out of the plain like a bruise. The cathedral breathed cold air scented with past oil and old kings. The Dauphin entered with the careful steps of a man who suspects the crown is a sentence given shape in gold. Candles shook with so many breaths gathered under stone. Jeanne stood a step behind him, armor dented, hair clinging to her face, eyes fixed on the altar. The anointing oil touched his brow and shone. Trumpets tried to reach heaven and fell back only a little. They said sunlight broke through stained glass and fell upon the girl who had brought him there. Many believe this to be poetic invention. The true record shows that France had a king again, and that the people who watched believed for the space of an hour that belief could be a season and not a moment. Night fell on Reims with a slow lid. The court feasted in rooms where meat returned to tables like a forgiven sin. Jeanne ate near a brazier and held her hands to the heat. The voices were quiet. The quiet felt like distance, not rest. She asked for Paris. The king smiled with the politeness of a man who has already decided to say no. Counselors gathered and poured patience into the air like oil on water. She pressed a second time, and a third, until the smiles hardened. She understood then that there are victories that bring their own defeats, yet for that day, the victory was whole. The bells of Reims sent sound into streets still white with dust from new banners. Children ran after soldiers whose steps had learned a different rhythm. Women lifted candles into windows and watched flame lean toward the night. Men who had swallowed despair tasted another food and tried not to choke on it. Jeanne walked through the press and kept her eyes on the dark above the roofs. She listened. The voices said nothing, which is sometimes how they say yes. Whispers spread that when she left the cathedral, a white feather fell from nowhere and settled on her shoulder. Historians agree this was only a story hearts make to keep themselves warm. What cannot be disputed is that she did not reach for the feather that did not fall. She reached for her banner and held it high. The silk snapped in a small wind that did not touch anyone else. She smiled, not as a girl who has won, but as a worker who sees the next task shaped inside the smoke of the day's fire. At the edge of the square she paused and looked back. The king stood in a light that made his face seem older. Courtmen hovered in a crescent behind him, soft voices wrapped in silk. In the far distance, a rider moved with a slower purpose, an English scout marking the weight of this hour on a map with a pencil. Worlds shifted against one another in that moment, and did not grind yet. The ground kept still, but only for now. She rode out of Reims with the banner lifting like a clean bone against the sky. Men fell in behind her. Drums kept a heartbeat many feet wide. The road reached forward. The wind tasted like iron and fruit trees. She did not know that delays would come, and that patience would be the word that would sew them together into a net. She knew only that obedience does not retire at the coronation of a king. It tightens. There are stories that claim she slept that night and dreamed of crowns falling into rivers. Yet many believe such dreams belong to writers, not to her. The true record shows that she lay down with her armor under her head and woke before dawn to pray. She was not finished. She had only moved the stone at the mouth of the cave. The rest of the mountain still stood. For those who awaited another sign, the sign had been given. A peasant girl had led an army in unmanned despair. A city had been lifted from its siege, and a king had been anointed within the hour she had promised. Whether heaven burned lilies into banners or not, no document can say. What can be said is that the field where sheep once ate poorly now sent a voice that carried through smoke and hunger and caught where it needed to, in the throat of a nation that was almost past saving and not yet beyond it. The day closed like a slow book. The army slept in layers of noise that softened until it sounded like a river. A sentry on the wall of Reims saw a figure in white armor stand alone for a while and then kneel. He could not hear the words. He could tell when the kneeling ended because she stood and turned her face toward the north where the next hour waited. Dawn would come late. She would not. They said she was born to save France. For this night at least, France remembered how to be saved. Tomorrow would test the word. Tonight the bells spoke and were answered. The oil on the king's brow had not dried. The banner moved against the dark like a single clean thought. And a girl with short hair and a wound that had not fully closed believed that obedience could still make a road through the wreck of a century. Was it faith that carried France to the altar? Or did need invent a saint to lift a crown it could no longer raise by itself?